Hi, welcome to Overlanding from home. My name is Anton. I'm an avid overlander, lover of nature, and humanitarian by heart. The past while, I've always been interested in the outdoors, and I want to hear about other people's experiences and their rigs. Yes, the big rigs, the small rigs, everything they've done to design them and how they plan it. I hope you enjoy listening. Let's find out who today's guest is. Hello and welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and thanks again for listening to another great podcast with a person that I've admired for as many years as I've managed to find out who he is, and I managed to meet him. Today I'm going to introduce Paul Marsh, who has a passion for overlanding and a dream since I think you were 10. Is that right, Paul?
Yes, welcome. Thank you very much, Anton. It's lovely to be here with you.
Great.
A dream since I was 10. You know, that's what I do. I build dreams. And my own dream started at 10 when I was sitting in a mountain hut with an old man. And under the sort of candlelight, we were talking, and he said, "So, Paul, what's your dream?" You know, at 10, you think you own the world and you know everything.
Of course. Yes.
And I looked at him and I said, "I'm going to drive through Africa one day." And he didn't actually flinch. He just looked at me and he said, "So what are you doing to prepare for that?" And I said, "Well, you know, I'm going to make it happen. Don't worry." You know, very confident little 10-year-old. And he said, let me give you my take. And he said, if you spend 10 minutes every day and you put a bit of time into that with a vision and see yourself doing it, your dream will come to pass.
Yes, yes.
And it did. It did eventually in my 30s. And I spent 1.5 years driving through Africa, covering some 70-odd thousand kilometers.
Yeah.
So, you know, dreams come true. Dreams do come true.
I completely agree with you, and obviously reading up on you and doing a little bit of research and chatting to you over the last few months, you have a engineering background, and you've managed to marry your engineering background with your current work. I mean, I think that's fantastic, and again, another dream. You get to build and do what you want in a market and an area that suits you. I mean, it's fantastic.
Yeah, you know, not everyone gets that right. And I think, you know, to follow your passion as what I do, and you know, four-wheel drives and engineering is my background, and of course, motor mechanical training too. And I found that started many years ago, you know, with I guess when I first went into the bush with a guy called Isak Barnard from Penduka Safaris.
Okay.
An amazing man, and he's a legend. If you read up on him, there's a book written about him called The Ivory Trail by T.V. Bulpin. And Isak was an incredible man in his own right, but in the bush, his knowledge was incredible. He would take you walking along wild tracks, and you know, you literally would be walking in the bush on foot, coming across all the wildlife. And he taught me a lot about the bush. He taught me a lot about being and surviving and driving your four-wheel drive in you know, difficult conditions.
Yes.
But more importantly, he showed me what it was like to go and travel very remotely. And I guess that's the passion, the yearning of being able to travel deeper into remote areas of Africa and again later on the world. It came from there, which was, what a privilege, what a lovely experience.
I completely agree. And I think, you know, do you happen to remember what happened at the age of 10 that you wanted to drive through Africa? I mean, is there something about the, you know, scenery, the wild open? What is your drive about getting out into the bush that was started at the age of 10?
Sure. You know, I think a lot of it was I always had a passion for vehicles, and I you know, it's difficult to remember, but I know seeing the very occasional overland vehicle that would come down through Africa. Because at that time, remember, we had sanctions in South Africa, so you couldn't actually drive your vehicle through Africa if you wanted to, not from South Africa. You know, you literally were stopped going in, I think, to Tanzania, if I'm correct. And that was because of sanctions, and you know, just weren't allowed to. So I would actually look out for vehicles that came through Africa, and they fascinated me. They fascinated me that people could drive such a long way in this amazing vehicle. And I mean, some of them were probably quite interesting and probably not nearly as sophisticated as we have today. But just that deep-seated exploration, to go and see. Yeah, why not? Eh? It's in the DNA, as someone once said, and I think it probably is with me.
I think it's fantastic. Now, folks, I think if you don't, go and have a look at Paul Marsh 4x4.com. Paul has two hats on today. Some are his personal points, and some are obviously work related, which can be one of the same. And I'm going to ask you, Paul, if you don't mind, just pick your brain on a few points. Now, there's a lot of different scenarios, but maybe we can narrow them down.
Yeah.
One of my most listened to podcasts is the difference between roof and ground tents, and I want to pick your brain. Now, every scenario is different, so I'm maybe on this one, if you can tell me what suits you, a rooftop tent or a ground tent. I mean, does the scenario change whether you're in winter or summer?
So I'm going to answer it in two ways because I think it's going to be interesting more. For myself personally, I like a roof tent for the ability to quickly move off the mark. So if I'm bush camping and I want to go on a game drive, normally if I'm in the bush, I want to get up and going very early. So that first chance of light, you can get going. Now, you can do that with a ground tent. You don't have to take all the kit and pack it away. You just got to zip everything up because if you don't get back in time, the monkeys will be there to welcome you back. And that can be a challenge. We've all experienced that when you bush camped, but that's not the main reason. I do like the fact that the bedding and everything stays out of the vehicle and it takes up less space and it puts it in a place. So I clearly like to divide my vehicle into sort of different areas. So there's the area you travel in, you drive in, which has its own comfort and what you need around you when you're driving, and then you have the area where you would have your kitchen and you're cooking from, and how we build that up and how you access that's very important. And then you have your living area, sort of outside the side of the vehicle, your awning. And, there's a lot focused around building the vehicles or setting up a vehicle when you're trying to look at living in those areas. And then, of course, you have the sleeping area on top. And I think I've had some really amazing game spots from my roof tent where I've heard animals at night and I could actually unzip the tent and look out and just enjoy a rare sight of something that's nocturnal. So from that point of view, I really like it. Where I found I've had disadvantages is when I'm wanting to book a campsite and, it's first come, first serve, and then you've got to leave something there. Then a ground tent's quite nice just to be able to put up. And if it's raining for a long period of time and it's, you get incessant rains in some parts of the world and some parts of Africa where you really want to get out of that damp, wet. And that's nice to have somewhere you can take shelter. So to answer the question to a lot of my clients, I mean, you must have experienced the same thing.
I had a Oztent RV5 on my rooftop, just to cart it, obviously. And then putting it down is pretty easy. Packing it up is pretty easy. But you're right. There's such a big scenario between the two. And I don't think there's one perfect scenario for wherever you go. If you leave, if you're only going out for a day's game drive, you have to pack your bed up, which can be a bit of a schlep, which is a whole nother chat for me, because I know that a lot of people look at websites and they follow videos on YouTube where they say, oh, but it takes only like 39 seconds to take this tent out and put it up, but they completely forget about how long it takes to pack things away. And to me, that's how I look at my setup, is about how long it takes to pack away. And a rooftop tent can be pretty easy. If you can leave your bedding in, it is super easy. But I think you're right. Every scenario will rely on where you are. I mean, that'll play a huge role.
Look, it varies on people's budgets. It varies on how people use their vehicles. And for a lot of the time, I think most people, I've had people who started out in roof tents. Now, the earlier roof tents, the fold-out type, which were probably a little bit more inexpensive. And then now later on, we get the clamshell type, which are a lot more convenient, but there's disadvantages and advantages to both. And I think when you try to weigh up what's right for someone, what's right for me is definitely not going to be right for everyone. That's for sure. How I travel is very different to other people. So what I'm really trying to impart are some of probably the hard-learned lessons where I made mistakes, and I can go, you know what, that didn't work for these reasons. But the key for me is really understanding what is your need, how are you going to travel, what is your budget going to look like, because that also has a role to play. It's some of these products are amazing and they cost a lot of money, and then you've got to work out how often do you use them. If you're going to build a vehicle to travel across Africa, you probably would invest, certainly I would, and I encourage my clients to invest money where it's going to take a lot of use. So your roof tent's going to take a lot of use. If you're taking a year long, sleeping in it, in and out. And so you want to buy a good quality. And it doesn't matter what style, you get good, better quality, like you do in all products. You can get some better, it depends what you pay for. I think a ground tent has every bit a role to play in camping. And I would hate to ever take away someone's dream because he couldn't afford a roof tent, or that he was told that that's the only way to go into the bush. Because, camping in a ground tent on the bush is also quite nice. You get up at night, you can step out your tent, you can go and take a walk. Obviously it's got to be safe. Have a pee, come back in. It's actually for a lot of folk. So I've had people who've come and said, I've done the roof tent thing, climbing up and down a ladder, not my thing. What do I do? Well, a ground tent. Nothing wrong with a ground tent. So, again, and you mentioned the Oz tent. I actually met the original owners of and designer, the old guy who designed the Oz tent in Australia many years ago. A lovely old man. And he was so excited to show me the Oz tent. It was really fantastic to see. And I was blown away. I really was. I looked at that and I thought, wow, it's a really good product. So every product I think anyone takes, you've got to understand, what are the weaknesses on the product? How do I look after this product? How do I maintain it? Because that's going to allow you to have longevity out of your product. And you see this on hire vehicles. Yes. When you've seen hire vehicles come back and you go and hire a vehicle and you see, I think a lot of the time people don't look after it, not because they don't always want to, it's because they're not educated how to. And that's it happens.
That's very true. I mean, I did a humanitarian work 2 years ago. One of the jobs that I was running projects in Namibia, and there was an Avis 4x4 rental, and it was a very quick handover. I wasn't there. The guy flew in from the US. They did the reading glasses with us, and it was a very quick handover, like literally 15 minutes. And halfway through it, the fridge wasn't working because the battery was dying and it wasn't charging. And no one, I mean, I didn't get involved in it, but it turns out it was a simple switch. In the end, it was a simple switch, and it would only charge when the engine was running. So obviously through the alternator, not through the solar, which was on the roof, And I think if correct me if I'm wrong, there's a few companies that you've designed or developed these 4x4 rental vehicles with. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of companies, a good few, and I've advised a number, and I have. And I think, there's no, again, right and wrong solution to that. I think companies come together and they decide what they're going to offer to the market. They decide how they're going to put it out there, and then they have a budget. When I'm approached to work with companies like this, for me, it is about simplicity. It is about trying to make it as reliable as possible. And I think, the couple of companies I have done a lot of work with and built entire fleets for, I felt that where we could add value, and we did actually for them, we did a lot of video training for them, because that enabled clients to actually pre-look at how you look after the stuff and how you use it, as opposed to bumbling through it. Getting on the first night and going, oh my God, I didn't really take much notice at the handover. I was tired, I was jet lagged, dehydrated, had a bad sleep, and now I've got to try and put this tent up. So that helps. It certainly does help. And then that comes, I have a passion and a stand I take in overlanding, and it's becoming more and more vocal, I guess. And that's, I believe, responsible overlanding is a duty. And if I can aid towards that, that's a passion I have as well, to enable people to be more responsible in their overlanding. And that comes through education, understanding. And how would it have been for you or the guy who collected that vehicle if he had maybe had more time and maybe had a bit more knowledge, and less rush, because often that's the case. How would that have come out, and if you look back at some of the incidents that happen, you can often look back and say, well, I've done it. I've made mistakes, and I've looked back at an accident or looked back at something that's gone wrong and go, oh, I was totally wrong. Why did I do that? I broke my own rules. So, but it's a good point, Anton. It's a very good point on that.
It's very true, and I actually wanted to give you a compliment because I've seen some of the vehicles that you've designed, and folks, if you really want to understand a good base model for a rental overlanding vehicle, go and have a look at some of them, as a base model that you can build onto. Because as Paul, as you've said, everyone has their own way, their own scenario. I like this type of camping stove, and you like that one. There's no right or wrong. It just depends on what you want. And some of these overlanding vehicles are I would say basic. There's a lot of work that goes into make them user friendly, and I think you've done an amazing job on that. And I just think anyone, if you want to understand, go to Paul's website. He's done a really easy way to communicate, but also look at what you can and can't do depending on where you're going. I mean, Paul, I think you would agree. You wouldn't necessarily take the same tires in a mud scenario than what you would on a corrugated dirt road through Namibia. So, people have to give you the right scenario to make decisions, and that knowledge comes from experience. All that equipment is super important.
No, look, thank you. And I mean, I think like anything, everyone has their needs. I mean, I've seen some amazing vehicles come out of Europe, out of Australia, out of America.
Yes.
And again, there's what I love about the whole community, if we can put it like that, is we all have a passion. We all do things differently. It makes it interesting. It doesn't make it right or wrong. It's just different.
Yes.
And, I think that for me is really exciting. I have great friends in different parts of the world who have driven and done a lot for the overlanding communities, in America with Scott, and in Australia with Andrew and Ronnie, guys who really put their passion and their life into it. And Andrew and I work very closely on a lot of stuff, a lot of projects, and Scott is a good friend of mine. And quite honestly, these are guys who actually put themselves out there. There are a lot of people who don't, who also add a lot of contribution to the platform, to what we do and build. But it is about understanding what you need, what you want, and what you don't need. That's probably more the biggest question.
So I'm going to ask you, maybe it's personal, I'm not so sure which hat you will put on here. If there's a product that a customer wants and you completely disagree, would you go with what the customer would say, or would you say, you're making a mistake, no ways? Not that that's a bad thing. It's just I'm sure not everyone will think about it.
So it's not, I don't take the right to make those decisions for my client and say, you will take this product or else. So I rather would say, I would educate my client and say, this is the product I think you should take, or maybe I wouldn't agree with for these reasons. Where I would take a stand is when it comes to their safety. So if someone came to me and said, you know what, I'm taking these tires, I don't care what you think, I'll go, you know what, I don't think our values are aligned, so I don't think we'll be working together. And I've done that occasionally with people, that not to make them wrong, but because we had a different set of values. And that's where I draw the line. So when it's coming to your safety, and I've learned those hard lessons, you're coming to me to ask me for advice, and I'm giving you my advice, and you're paying me for it. But basically, there's a value in understanding why someone's sharing it with you. So to answer your question, that's where I draw the line. When it says safety, otherwise, I don't mind if someone wants to fit something. I have clients all the time who they want to get quite a complex product that they want to fit in their car. But I'm very clear to make them understand maybe there's no support for it. So please understand when it has a problem, we're going to be a little bit more challenged to sort it out. This is how you need to look after it better. So really, it's not a right and wrong product, but is it right for you, for the circumstances you're going into? And that's my duty to educate the people in my experience. Now, people all have different experience. So, sure. But when it comes to safety, I'm clear. I draw the line. I'm not prepared to compromise anyone's safety for anything. And I'll choose not to work with someone on those grounds because I'm not serving them in the best way I can.
That's a very, very good point. Safety is a very, very big thing, especially when you go into some of the regions that you and I know about where there really is nothing. You get one person every 30 kilometers, and you only need to go 5Ks to not see or be able to reach anyone with network. So I completely agree with you, and I just look at equipment as such a big deal. I know that you and I live in South Africa. We have a massive overlanding industry. We have a massive invention industry when it comes to overlanding, and very entrepreneurial people that develop and create their own product, and it ends up selling. If there's something in the network that you have, will you develop it yourself? Would you prefer to import it, or do you shopping online? I mean, how do you normally want to do it? Would you prefer to work with a local that will make it for you, or are you happy just going to see what the price is and import it?
So if it's personally for me, I mean, it depends on your capabilities. So I quite like making stuff and developing products for myself. Would I put it out there to people? Yes, if I thought someone could use it. I've often shared ideas with companies, and we've developed products together, and everyone can benefit from it, which is fantastic. There's a great platform for where you can buy a product, and it's global. I have clients who do a lot of research around the world, and they will look at a product in America, or they'll come back and say, yeah, I've really seen this in Europe. And, so it becomes a global research, because it's so easy on the internet to say, what do I want and what do I need? The question comes down to, do you want to spend that money bringing it in? Can we have something local that could do the job as well? And if not, maybe that's worth bringing it in. So, it's so interesting because there are so many new products coming on the market. I think the big thing is, and I often say to people, take less gear and more experience. Educate yourself in what you need to know, the sort of the skills you need to know, the what-if scenarios, so that when it can or does go wrong, you already have a good idea of how you should sort of deal with that scenario. Few people actually prepare themselves for an accident. It's probably the biggest risk you have on an overland trip, much more than your car being broken into or something is an accident. You're driving a vehicle which is heavier, the road conditions are different. If I said to you that Namibia has a record for the highest number of rollovers in the world of four-wheel drive vehicles, it's quite astounding. On a country that has some of the best, country that has some of the best dirt roads in the world, and they're not to blame. They have beautiful roads. People drive too fast, and they're not always in four-wheel drive. So you actually look at then, whose fault is that? Why did it happen? Did they have the right gear? Did they have too much gear? Was it in the right place? So again, we go back to what's important, where you're going, how you're going to do it. And you made a point on tires. That tires are critical. I mean, it's a safety aspect, and it's a very key thing. And they do vary depending on where you're going. Someone's going to go West Africa, they're going to encounter a lot more mud. They're going to drive a lot of tar to get there. But when they get to those areas when there's serious mud, it's quite nice to have really the right tire. So, again, it's about where am I spending my money and how am I prioritizing what I'm going to spend it on. And it's difficult because there's a lot of products. And often I think people are led down, they're reading reports and they're reading blogs, and you've got to discern when you're a reader or you're listening to someone about a product. Is this right for me? And is the person giving the advice coming from a background of good experience? And I think I spend more time with people trying to separate what really is right for them, because there's so much information out there.
I think it's great to just chat with you about it, because there's just so many different options out there, and to narrow down what's accurate and right can be quite challenging to I'm sure some of your clients or friends that just don't know. I'm a big fan of tires. The first thing I bought for my Defender was the right tires that I thought worked for me, and I ended up on Cooper ST Maxes, and I've been impressed with them ever since. I think their customer service and their what's the other thing? Their Tire for Life afterwards works for me for what I want, because I have a family, and having the right tires goes a long way. And I looked at everything. What's the sound noise compared to a BFG or a general What's the usability off road? What's the sidewall? And it's something that people take seriously enough because it's such a big deal. It was definitely the first thing, and it's interesting that you chose tires because it was going to be on my next point before we ended off.
So, on tires, like you said, I've used a lot of different types of tires in the world, and I found them to be absolutely amazing. And what I found really along the way is that there are different tires that people tend to like because they're marketed very well and they're branded very well. And it doesn't take away, the tire. The tire you've mentioned, the Coopers, I've run them on my trucks. I've run a lot of other different tire makes. I think the first tire I went through Africa was the Michelin. If I'm correct, it was an XCL. But it was an amazing. At that time, it was with tubes and split rims, and it's another conversation for another day. But certainly, I did very well, and it was the best tire at the time. And at that time, it stood out head and shoulders. Today, there's a lot of very good tires on the market, and you would choose again if someone was looking to buy. It's kind of there's a budget to consider, but head and shoulders above that is your safety.
Yeah.
And depending on where you're going and what you're doing, it may not be necessary to spend and buy the most expensive tire, depending on where you're going. What are you loading the vehicle to? What's the terrain you're going to? And I guess that's it. So it's where do you spend your money and where do you make your compromises? Very, very valuable information.
I completely agree. And on that note, I think I'm going to end it because I want to keep talking to you on another podcast. There's just so much to try and cover. And thank you again for this time. It's only half an hour, but I'm just really, really happy that we got to do this. And I'm going to try and reach out again to you if that's okay and touch base on another few subjects because I think people really need to understand some of the scenarios. And folks, if you didn't get it, I will put Paul's details below in the podcast and you'll find it on social media. But Paul, thank you very much for your time. I know you have a lot of stuff going on and still got clients even during the lockdown that are talking to you. So thank you again.
Pleasure. Thank you all and keep up the good work, Anton. You take care.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Cheers, man. Bye-bye.